Hi, I'm Jenna.
And I'm Steve. Welcome to All Things Mad Men, from Chip and Dip to Zooby Zoo.
There's so much to love about this amazing show, and we're happy to connect to fans like us who discover new things with each rewatch.
Be advised, while we aren't gratuitous with spoilers, they can pop up as we discuss character arcs through the final season. Let's get started with Mad Men C to Z.
This is Season 6, Episode 4, To Have and to Hold. This episode was written by Aaron Levy and directed by Michael Uppendahl. In the commentary, Matt Weiner talks about how this episode is all about different kinds of cheating. In Mad Men, I know, that's really shocking. To me, it seems like a lot of the plot points are dealing with what's hidden and what's dragged into the light. Of course, the episode title refers to the name of Megan's soap opera, but there's also this element of what do you have in terms of relationships and values and success? And what secrets are you holding? And if those are revealed, what's left?
For me, I like to focus on, what are your motives for the cheating? What were you hoping to obtain or avoid through it? And then, as you mentioned, what are the consequences when that secret is discovered? And how does that affect the person who was betrayed? But also, how does that affect the betrayer? And in all the examples in this episode, and they're so numerous, and, they go from personal to professional and everything in between, those questions bubble up to the surface.
The episode opens at Pete's city apartment, where he and Dawn are secretly meeting with Tim from Heinz Ketchup. We intended to mention this when he appeared in the previous episode, and we left it out, so let's credit Kit Pardue, who plays the exec from Heinz Ketchup. You may have seen him in 13 or ER, but I remember him best from Remember the Titans, as the football player from California.
And we can see Tim is all in on the betrayal here. He reassures them that Raymond won't know that they're actually pitching to him. And it's clear he's aware that Raymond has betrayed Tim in saying that there is no way they can pitch to him. And then as well in this scene, we see Tim removing his wedding ring. So he's going to forget about any other responsibilities he may have. So he comes across as a very greasy character, I think.
And it really emphasizes the seedy arrangement since they're meeting at Pete's apartment, which was designated for Pete to cheat. Dawn voicing concern about Raymond's disapproval here is pretty belated because the fact that they're meeting behind his back is already a problem. Raymond made that very clear. So, of course, Dawn is officially cheating at work and at home. We also get a lot about doors in this episode, people listening outside or wishing they were inside. And here, Dawn and Pete listen at the apartment door for the elevator to chime so they know Tim has left before they risk talking after the meeting.
Pete offers his apartment to Dawn, so presumably Dawn could use it to cheat, even though Dawn actually lives in Manhattan. So it's kind of funny because I get the sense of Dawn trying to impose a bit of moral superiority on Pete in his response and sort of his coolness to that proposition. But we know what a cheater Dawn is.
Next, Dawn's secretary, meets her friend Nikki after work. And I was so happy we were finally going to get more about Dawn and her life and perspective when I saw this scene. All we get is that she's in Nikki's wedding, she's not meeting people to date, partly because she's so busy at work, and she says she's never going to meet someone in that office. It would be great if Dawn got that storyline, actually, if she met somebody in the office, but we just don't get very much here. Dawn's friend Nikki is played by Idara Victor, and you may have seen her in Rizzoli and Isles, Minx, Genius, or Shameless.
What I like about this scene is I think we get a scene of just how isolating and lonely it is for Dawn in that office. Dawn has proven herself professionally and, in fact, seems to avoid some of the pitfalls that other secretaries of Dawn Draper have fallen into. Yet still, it's a lonely place. And you really get a sense of the cost of the prejudice, even for somebody who ostensibly, from the outside, you'd say, oh, well, she made it. She's working on Madison Avenue. She's one of a select lucky few. It's clear she's still paying a heavy price for where she works.
I'm glad to have a scene rather than no scene to just call out that truth of how challenging her role must be. And I know we've talked about this before, that for so much rich exploration about sexism and family dynamics and class issues, Mad Men doesn't tackle racism with anywhere near that level of deftness or attention. And a show can't do everything, but I miss that in it. I wish Carla had more meaningful storylines, and I wish we saw more from Dawn outside of her being a hard worker who, like Peggy, has friends and family who don't relate to her Madison Avenue life. I just wish it were stronger.
It might be unfair to other shows if it was ticking the box on that, like so many other things it does so well. I think, the relationships, anti-Semitism, well, I think it would just take it up one more notch from a very high place that it's already at.
Next, we see Joan's mother, Gail, with Joan's longtime friend, Kate, who's visiting from out of town. Marley Shelton, who plays Kate, was in The Sandlot as well as 1923 and Pleasantville. And you can see Gail mugging for attention here. She made dinner for the three of them so they could all chat together, and Joan wants to take Kate out instead.
I like the writing in this scene because it feels very genuine to me, and I know I say this too much. I think we see a number of dynamics here that are very true to many of our lives. So like you mentioned, Gail seeking to cling to her daughter's social life and to try and be part of it. We see Joan trying to block her out a bit and make it clear, going out on the town with her mom isn't exactly her idea of a good time. And then I like this sort of country mouse, city mouse dynamic between Kate and Joan. Joan is this partner at a Madison Avenue agency. Kate is very impressed by this and really idolizing what Joan has managed to achieve. From Kate's standpoint, Joan is in the world's most glamorous city. I think in Kate's dreams, these are two aspirations that she would be so happy if she could achieve for herself.
Kate lives in Spokane and works for Mary Kay, which was started in Dallas in 1963. And she says she's interviewing with Avon in New York, which started in 1886. I remember Avon ladies and sample products from my childhood, and my mom sold Mary Kay when I was a little bit older, so we had a lot of those pink containers around the house, but no pink Cadillac. Even though Kate's experience is very different from Joan, I love that Joan gets a friend who has loved her for a long time and who also has a career and family, because we've been feeling Joan's loneliness, even though she holds it together really well. So I'm happy for her to have this.
I like it as well because it gives us some insights into who Joan is and where Joan came from. Because I will confess, and I know this is not correct, I kind of assume Joan is of the city, from the city, has always been in the city. These sort of aspirations and things that she has, she's always possessed. So this idea that Joan is actually a transplant and came from out west, I like it. It fleshes out the character for me in a way, and it makes me, I think, almost respect the character more because she's had to go further, challenge herself more, and step outside of a world that she knew in order to get to this place that she's in today. I find that very compelling.
So then we see Dawn and Sylvia having a makeout session in the elevator, and they have plans to meet up later. So this is another thing happening behind closed doors.
And they're clearly enjoying each other's company. Sylvia's playing with him a bit, and it seems like Dawn is really embracing the secrecy and the way in which they're pulling off this affair.
Back at Joan's apartment, they're having dinner. They're admiring Kate's diamond watch that she earned from the company. Gail brags on Joan a little bit, and they're wishing Kate well on her interview. And it's that thing where you get together and it's all smiles. Kate's life looks good and Joan's life looks good. They're happy for each other, but we know there's more to the story.
And I think it draws a nice contrast to this scene between the success that Kate is having at Mary Kay, supposedly interviewing with Avon, these two firms as representing some of the very limited opportunities for women to really advance at that time in corporate America. And Mary Kay and Avon were very much at the front end of that, contrasted to Joan, who's on Madison, this male-dominated Madison Avenue, where, we know the backstory as to how Joan has managed to succeed here, but it has been a long, hard struggle for her. I think she throws out, she's been there 15 years and they still treat her like a secretary. And even though it feels or it looks like she's got to the top of the mountain, we know there are some limitations to both how she's perceived and treated at the firm.
Ken goes into Harry's office complaining about his in-laws after the weekend, And we used to see Pete doing this all the time. So when Harry calls him on it, Ken has this brief, funny truth call out when he realizes, oh, he did just come in to complain. And he never verbally compares himself to Pete, but we know that he's not a role model. Dow Chemical at that time period became the target of outrage for many Vietnam protesters. And for all Ken's family ties and business interests, he isn't on board with any weapon at any cost. So Harry gets an idea on the spot and he sets up a meeting to make Ken's father-in-law happier with his ad agency.
Sticking with our theme of betrayal in this scene, we know that Ken had real hesitation to bring in his father-in-law as a client. Now that Dow is one of their clients, he's now grousing about his father-in-law to Harry of all people. And we know Harry can't keep a secret. Even Ken is susceptible to the cheating accusation.
There are several hints that Scarlett and Harry might be sleeping together, but it's never clearly defined. So here in the scene, Scarlett has a line where she says, Harry has great ideas, and Harry just smiles proudly at Ken. So we're not sure, but it's Mad Men. There's probably cheating. Next, we see Stan sneaking into a locked room to work on Project K, which activates, I don't know if it's full-on paranoia with Ginsburg, but it seems close. And it certainly caused for curiosity around the office.
Here, I think we see the perspective of cheating from that of the jilted. It's Michael Ginsburg. He's frustrated that he's not privy to this, whatever goes on in the secret room. And then we can see that everybody who's on the outside is in full speculation mode about what's going on in there. And I just love the sort of neurotic energy of Michael Ginsburg and, wrapping it up with the war and a military account and killing. It just gives it such an aggressive edge. We know the secret behind it is actually about a condiment.
I love that Dawn goes into the locked room to work with Stan, and Ginsburg is speculating it's a military account. And what's actually happening is Dawn and Stan are smoking a joint and arguing about whether a hot dog is more for ketchup or mustard.
Weed is associated with this youth movement and creativity and freedom. So the ad agencies are all in on that, and clients apparently find it appealing. I'm looking at these guys in this room, giggling at their jokes. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm not sure weed is helpful to productivity or creativity in this case.
Scarlett is acting friendly with Dawn Draper's secretary. And the whole time, Dawn keeps her distance. She won't go to Clara's birthday party because she has to work. She doesn't acknowledge Clara's reference to the weed smell. She won't tell Scarlett whether Dawn is working in the closet on the secret project. So she has all that discretion that Peggy learned about early on. But Dawn does agree to punch Scarlett out later, even though Scarlett's leaving early. And this is the horror movie equivalent of the person who hears a noise and says, I'm going to go check on that alone. I mean, it's going to end badly.
She's cautious and careful. She knows she's not in friendly territory here. It's just not to say anything against Scarlett, because we haven't seen any reason to suspect Scarlett of any bad intentions. But just we can see the caution with which Dawn has to live her day-to-day life here. At the same time, Dawn wants to fit in and get along, and we can see Scarlett leveraging that influence.
Next, we see Megan in her dressing room in her maid costume at work when she finds out she's going to get a storyline with love scenes. And they take great pains to show Megan is excited about having a bigger part to act on the show. It's not that she's into the guy she's going to be doing the love scenes with. Arlene, the resident soap opera queen bee, tells Megan she advocated for her to get the bigger part since her husband is the head writer. So it looks like Megan's dreams are coming true here. She's got a part on the soap opera, the part is expanding, and she's finding some success in advocates.
One thing I love about Mad Men writing is they often seem to have very knowledgeable sort of experts in various situations who serve as the guide, reading them into how the dynamic works, what the situation is, and how they may want to conduct themselves. And sometimes they have their own agendas for doing so. Arlene is playing that role in this scene, warning her that the real challenge of these types of scenes is not going to be anything to do with the job itself. How Dawn will respond to this and take it. And it seems that Arlene is speaking from long experience in the industry.
Arlene is played by Joanna Going. She's also been in Kingdom and House of Cards, and she was in the first season of The Pit. She's the woman who makes herself sick as an excuse to get her son to the therapist. And she was also in the 1990s version of Dark Shadows, so that's a fun callback to Megan and Julia's audition conversation.
It almost seems like Megan is somewhat dismissive of Arlene here, that Megan's taking Dawn's comments about, oh, I'm happy for you and great, you do your career. That's maybe a dangerous assumption for Megan to make at this point.
I don't think she thinks that's going to be so easy. I think she's empathetic and she thinks about it from her point of view and how she would feel about it, and she says so later. So I think she knows that that's going to be a speed bump. But I think she's so genuinely thrilled that her acting career is coming together, things are working out, and it is her finding success that she did it. Maybe that's even a nod to not that her career is more important than Dawn, but just the fact that she can brush that aside and still let herself be happy about her success says something about their relationship and how she thinks about it. In the office, Joan discovers Scarlett is missing when Meredith comes looking for her. Again, it's not totally clear if Harry and Scarlett are having an affair, but it is implied. Meredith says, "I can't find Scarlett or Mr. Crane." And then Joan looks up and sees Harry walking in with Ken. So you could suspect that initially she thought they were off somewhere together, and now it's just a mystery about where Scarlett is.
Well, and let's be clear, this is a betrayal by Meredith. Meredith's not going to go to Joan if a friend is missing in that office. So Meredith is deliberately pulling this into the spotlight.
Next, Megan welcomes Dawn home, and she's got Arlene's advice in her head. She's being overly friendly and trying to make Dawn comfortable with the information about her love scenes. She's pretty good here. She's honest. She tells the whole truth. She admits she wouldn't like it if their roles were reversed. I think she tells it about as well as she can. And Dawn doesn't blow up. He's more like he was when Betty wanted something, the disgruntled husband granting a favor. I don't think he likes the idea, but I'm also wondering how much he cares about Megan at this point, and if this is just an act he thinks he's supposed to put on in this moment.
Yeah, it is hard to read how much of this is a representation of how he really feels and how much of it is just he's not especially engaged. We can see the enthusiasm he has at this stage of his affair with Sylvia. A lack of reaction or response at this particular moment is not necessarily indicative of a lack of response or reaction when he finally puts his full attention to this matter.
Ken and Harry go to meet with Dow, and Harry's idea to combat the bad publicity is to have Dow sponsor a TV special with beloved stars. They mention Joe Namath, Julie Andrews, John Wayne, and Joey Heatherton. She was a dancer, singer, and actress who appeared in movies and performed in Vegas and variety shows. I remember TV specials like Circus of the Stars. The whole concept feels demeaning to me a little, to the stars and the audience, because it's like getting people to look over here at the shiny, pretty people and forget about what's happening in the world. But that is what the ad people do every day.
Yeah, and it just feels like they're trading on the currency of their sheer celebrity, because I like sports and, Joe Namath had some outstanding quarterback performance in the NFL. I don't really have a lot of interest in seeing Joe Namath sing and dance. Agent Orange or Napalm are still awful realities in the Vietnam War, regardless of whether Dow sponsors a funny sing and dance show with Joe Namath and Julie Andrews or John Wayne in a Camelot sketch or whatever it is. Not to say that we aren't still trying to leverage and exploit celebrity for commercial purposes nowadays.
The next day, Joan confronts Scarlett about her absence in her time card. Scarlett has a lot of excuses, and she was leaving to buy a present for a colleague, which is work-related. I don't get the sense Joan is bothered so much by the absence as by the dishonesty. Did it seem hypocritical for Joan to be so invested in this? I think we can probably say Joan puts a lot more time and effort into the company than Scarlett. But we know Joan left work to be with Roger back in the day, so maybe this is a little hypocritical.
I think that's absolutely right, but I think it's really about power and control. Joan is giving Scarlett an opportunity to come clean, And since everybody plays hooky, it feels almost like a test to me where Joan is saying, okay, Scarlett, you're busted. So now you come clean, tell me the real story. I give you a smack on the wrist. This is how the game is played. And if you want to play this game, you read me into it and I still maintain control because I'm your manager. I'm responsible for this. The fact that Scarlett keeps doubling down on the fib and keeps trying to evade, I think that's her real sin here against Joan. And then I think that forces Joan into a position where now she's going to bring this to a conclusion where her own authority and power are reasserted in no uncertain terms.
When Harry comes in with Ken, he's so happy he sold the Dow TV special. But then he sees his secretary on her way out in tears. And Harry's defense of Scarlett continues to look like maybe they're having an affair. He says, "We are attached," which Scarlett denies at the same time. But you can also read Harry's anger here as Joan overstepping on his territory, again, the power and control. So whether or not he and Scarlett are sleeping together, Harry wants to express how much he's in charge. Harry corners Joan in a narrow space, and he insists Joan apologize to Scarlett. He doesn't even wait to hear what happened. And of course, Joan doesn't apologize, but her power is challenged again by a guy when she's looking to fire a secretary who lied to her.
Yeah, and I think the betrayal as well is that this is done publicly because they very well could have said, we need to have a talk and, I'd like to understand it. You can say something like that, close the door in the office and have whatever discussion you want without an audience. But the fact that Harry confronts her publicly and he's, throwing insults, increasing the stakes and the embarrassment and the friction here in a way where now there has to be a winner and a loser, and that loser is going to be publicly humiliated. It's not a great example of professionalism on the part of Harry here. And I think Joan is the one who's bearing the brunt of this because her power in that office is high, but she has to wield it in a subtle way and sort of a back office way. She can't go toe to toe in a flamethrower contest, even with someone like Harry, who we know is not the most respected person there.
So Harry is still seething, and he watches Joan through the glass in the partners meeting, and he assumes she's telling on him. So he decides to barge in. And Harry is ugly and vengeful, and he's right about what he's saying. He went out and got a giant contract, and Joan did not earn her partnership in broad daylight. That's true. And the look on all their faces is horror that he's making them face this truth, and they're all complicit. And if Harry knows, they can assume everybody else does too.
One line I just want to call out is when they go to stop Harry because it's clear he's misunderstood what's happening in the meeting. And Roger says, oh, no, let him finish. Because Roger's only too happy to watch the train go shooting off the track. And I don't think he realizes it's going to end up with something that's going to embarrass and humiliate Joan yet again. I think there's a lot of truth to what Harry says, but of course, the way he says it and the forum, it's extremely brutal. The partners don't really argue against him in any way. To me, the substance of Harry's role and what he's doing for the firm and how he's been treated is a failing of the partners from a professional perspective. Harry's been stewing and feeling unappreciated. The partners haven't really moved to proactively address these sentiments. They all circle the wagons to support Joan in the moment, but they can't exactly kick Harry to the curb either. They have no plan B for him, so they're in a bit of a quandary.
Let's also remember that Joan did great work reading scripts for Harry. She also suggested buying extra time for ads when a soap opera had a special storyline running. And Harry never looked at Joan as a professional. He hired a guy and asked Joan to explain the job to him. So for Harry to act like he's the innocent victim is so rich since he's the one who taught Joan, no matter how good her work is, the people in that office will not value it or her the way they would value a man. And when Harry storms out, the partners weigh in on keeping Dawn and Scarlett in place, overriding Joan's decision. So she's in the room ostensibly with power, but it turns out not really.
And I think it just reinforces Joan's point, of what she was saying to Kate. Despite having the title and the status and the partnership, I mean, she possesses an ownership stake she's something less than a true partner in the firm. That's an uncomfortable truth. To have it emphasized and illustrated in this way, it feels harsh, and nobody likes to have that reality underlined in a very public setting with all the other partners around the table.
But Joan hasn't voiced that to Kate yet, so I actually think this incident is where it becomes clear to her that no matter what her official title is, this is really the low point where it's just, I really don't have the power I imagined I did.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I guess the only good thing you can draw from these types of reveals is recognizing there's an issue or a problem is often, the first step to then saying, okay, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to tolerate it? Are you going to change it? Somebody like Joan, who as a character we know has a real track record of intelligence and ingenuity and forceful drive to go for what she wants in life. If this is her drawing a line under this and saying, okay, I'm not satisfied with this, I would say, anybody on the wrong side of that had better watch out because, when Joan goes for things, she tends to push her way through.
Dawn meets up with her friend Nikki again. And again, I wish this scene brought us more depth. What we get is her friend saying Dawn should know better than to trust the other secretaries, and Dawn saying she just will keep her head down. That's her whole strategy. Dawn's description of the office dynamics, the men and women crying and feeling stressed out all the time, that's not especially new information for us. We can see that. So I wish we had more about Dawn herself.
It's a pretty bleak description of the office, though, by Dawn, isn't it? I mean, I guess we spend all our time hobnobbing with the partners and these executives for the most part, and look at the firm, or at least I do. Most of the time, I'm looking at it through the eyes of a Roger or a Don or a Pete. When you hear that, oh, hey, everybody's scared, it sounds quite toxic as you move further down the food chain. And I found myself thinking, yeah, I guess it would. And this sort of capriciousness with which the partners act in given circumstances. And we made a big point of lamenting the way Sal was summarily fired, despite not having done anything to merit it. Yet you can see that sort of toxicity still exists throughout the food chain here. The other piece I would say in Dawn's conversation with her friend is Bridezilla and all wrapped up in her personal life. Yet we can see Dawn feeling that lack of the personal life that ideally she might want. And this sense of having to sacrifice. You can have one or the other, but you can't have both. And we know that draws a parallel to Joan's life, where she was seeking something in her personal life that fell apart. And again, for appearance's sake, her professional life is just amazing. But even that is sullied and problematic, as this episode illustrates. And the question is, can even someone like Joan have it all? Can she have the career and the personal life?
Kate and Joan are having dinner out in New York at a place Kate heard about. Joan would never pick this place. She compares it to a soda fountain in high school. There are phones at the tables so diners can call each other if they're interested in chatting. We find out Kate came to New York to have an adventure, basically to cheat on her husband. We also find out Joan had a short marriage to someone named Scotty, and we know she never told Greg about that because she told him he was her first. Joan knows exactly how to play the pickup game here. Kate doesn't, but Joan has been through all this before, and it's different from when she roomed with Carol and they would go out together. This isn't exciting. It's tired and predictable. Joan is only putting up with this for her friend's sake.
And that's so clear here. For the country mouse, you're in the exciting city and you're going to have this little adventure, fantasy escape. And this is old hat for Joan.
Megan and Dawn are having dinner with Mel and Arlene. They mention the Smothers Brothers, who had a TV show, Comedy Hour, starting in 1967. And Mel argues their comments are protected by free speech. While Dawn, of course, understands hiding the ugly truth. He's in favor of a variety show that's uncomplicated and not threatening and shouldn't make you think. Megan is trying to get Mel to say the love scenes in the soap opera aren't very explicit, so Dawn will be less upset. But Mel doesn't downplay that because he has other intentions. Mel and Arlene express their interest in taking Don and Megan back to their place and swinging. Megan takes several beats to understand the offer. I wonder if Don is pretending to all of them that he's surprised.
I think he must be here, right? Like there's this sort of look on his face of he's having difficulty believing what he's actually hearing. I just cannot imagine that Dick Whitman spending his adolescent years living in a brothel, a literal brothel, and then now this lifestyle that Don Draper has in Manhattan, to the point where Bobby Barrett mentions that he has a reputation. He's that well known as a great lover in the city. Would not have bumped into the Mels and Arlenes of Manhattan and literally everything else along the spectrum. I'm such a fan of the writing of this show, and often when I feel like, oh, something doesn't ring true or I want to criticize it, I double take just because the writing does such a good job. I think, okay, I must be the one who's wrong here. But I have trouble with this scene, not from Megan's perspective. I get it that maybe this is her first time, but I got to figure Don has seen this a million times. I think he's going to look more like Joan next to Kate, just kind of bored and like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. But, doesn't surprise me, doesn't shock me, doesn't scare me. The other reference I was thinking with regard to this was from Skyfall, the James Bond film where Javier Bardem is coming on to James Bond and he says, oh, there's a first time for everything, as he's sort of stroking his chest as James Bond is tied up to a chair. And James Bond replies back, what makes you think it's my first time? And just as cool as you'd expect James Bond to do it. And I love the writing in that scene because I'm thinking the same thing. Like James Bond, Don Draper, these guys have been there, done it all. You are not going to scare them or shock them or surprise them with anything sexual ever for any reason.
It also felt like a little bit of a callback to Dawn telling Betty her friend was a party girl, and Betty being so surprised to discover that. Megan has that same air of being stunned but not wanting to seem naive. Arlene's husband, Mel, is played by Ted McGinley, and you may have seen him on Happy Days, Love Boat, Revenge of the Nerds, or Married with Children back in the day. More recently, he's been in The Baxters and Shrinking. I didn't recognize him without his blonde hair.
Mel and Arlene seem to take the rejection pretty well. They're not all jilted. Life goes on.
Back in the cab with Kate and Joan, the waiter named Leo is now sitting between them, and they're on their way to the Electric Circus. The Electric Circus opened in 1967 in the East Village after Andy Warhol's multimedia show called Exploding Plastic Inevitable with the Velvet Underground was held there. The light shows and projections and music performances at the Electric Circus were intended to be an immersive experience, and when we think about the US in the 60s, I think we imagine this sort of vibe that this club is giving.
Yeah, I think they do a great job. To me, that's some of the magic of this series and filmmaking in general is how they can transport you away to a time and place in an instant so successfully. So I think it's really well done.
Megan and Don are laughing together in the cab on the way home about swinging with Mel and Arlene, who have been married for 18 years. Don says he thought Mel was going to ask him to direct a commercial, and Megan is thinking about whether that was the only reason she was given a bigger storyline. Honestly, I felt like both Mel and Arlene were more into Don than Megan.
Yeah, I think I get the same vibe as you.
At the Electric Circus, Joan is on one end of a couch while Kate makes out with Leo, and Joan is strikingly alone. She always fits in and belongs, but not here. It isn't that she's not cool enough for this scene, but she dressed for the office that morning. She's a mom, she's an office partner, and this just isn't her life. So when Leo's friend Johnny shows up and flatters Joan, she leans in. It's a little escape, a little pretending in the dark that you're young and free and you have no problems.
Yeah, I had the same vibe. Joan's heart isn't in this. She doesn't need an adventure. She's just being a good friend, making the best of the situation here. Kate's fantasy is going to come true. She's had a tough day. This isn't her plan. She's just being a good wingman here for Kate.
The Bonnie and Clyde song that's playing by Serge Gainsbourg and Brigitte Bardot was released in 1968. And it fits Don Draper very well, in the sense you can wonder, is he a glamorous outlaw or just a criminal. And maybe Joan is wondering that a little bit about herself, too. Is she the stylish, hardworking, deserving partner? Or is she an imposter because of Herb or because of whatever else she's doubting about herself?
Talking about Bonnie and Clyde, I think of the Warren Beatty film. The line in the Warren Beatty film that always makes me laugh is Warren Beatty, of all people, playing Clyde, saying, "I ain't no lover boy."
Bert and Roger call Harry into the office the next day and give him the entire commission on his Broadway Joe special for Dow. It's worth $23,500. It's a huge bonus, but Harry's there to talk about a partnership. Why do you think they resist having Harry as a partner?
I think that they don't think he's smart enough and they don't respect him. So I think they're quite happy that he's been able to manage their TV business and he's managed to insinuate himself into Hollywood. But I don't think they respect him as someone who should be a decision maker in the company itself. So they're happy to throw money at him and comp him. And as you mentioned, it's that commission, the full commission on Broadway Joe, which just sounds horrific. Although I would probably watch it the way I would watch a car crash. That's greater than his annual compensation, all in a bonus. They want to buy him off, but still keep him at arm's length. Did you have a different take on the non-partnership for Harry?
No, I agree. I think the partners see Harry as a second-tier person, and they like his results, but they don't like him. But I thought it was funny that Bert mentioned he was impressed. Roger suggests firing him before he cashes his check.
Roger gets the best lines. Like, I was thinking about how much I enjoyed Roger on the first watch of this series, and I wasn't as critical as I have been on the subsequent watch. But I think part of what distracted me was just he gets so many clever, funny lines, and it clouded my judgment of what he's actually up to and actually produces and contributes and things.
Megan's on her way out the door for her love scene at work, and she kisses Dawn. He's not even getting ready for work yet, but he wishes her good luck.
He's got to stop by Sylvia's place.
He's got a busy morning. Joan and Kate are in bed at Joan's apartment in their clothes from the night before. And this is the real conversation friends have together. Their genuine admiration for each other, their own self-doubts, all mixed together. Kate said she wanted to try on living Joan's life by going out in the city and having a wild time. And Joan doesn't go into the details, but she says she's still treated like a secretary. And Kate has a powerful reframe for Joan about this. She says, I had a husband to fall back on even when she started working, and Joan didn't. And she says, I don't care how they make you feel, but Joan is impressive. And that message comes at the right time to remind Joan to armor up and be the unapologetic office goddess, whether or not Scarlett still works there.
And Kate's perspective is that of an outsider. And I would even argue you could objectively demonstrate that Kate is incorrect and looking at the flash and dazzle of the title and the money and the city. But it's interesting because I think, as you mentioned, that perspective of Kate, and I think that glossing over of the negatives is helpful for Joan, and that this does serve as a platform to continue chasing after and struggling for those other aspects that she really does crave and want, both in her personal life and professionally. And we know Joan is strong and she's a fighter. And I think you're totally right here. The quick glance through Kate's eyes at what she perceives Joan to have, even if it's not completely accurate, helps Joan to reorganize herself to say, I need to keep struggling here. I need to keep going.
I also think it's important that when Joan's mom brings in baby Kevin, that Joan and Kate both love on him. Joan loves her job, and she's happy to be Kevin's mom. She doesn't have resentment toward the baby. She doesn't feel trapped by him. She loves him as part of her whole life. And we've seen that not be the case for some of the other characters in Mad Men. So I think it's such a short amount of screen time, but I do think it matters for this character.
Who couldn't love Roger Sterling's love child? I mean, really.
Next, we cut to Dawn giving the presentation to Heinz Ketchup. The pitch shows food, but no ketchup. Don says it gets into the consumer's imagination. In 2017, Heinz actually ran Don Draper's Pass the Heinz ad campaign for ketchup. We'll link an article about that on our website, Mad Men C to Z.
We always knew that Peggy was a real contributor to the creative work at the firm. And this is, I think, drawing our attention to her absence here. It's a bold campaign. Dawn is making the pitch, but we can see that Tim isn't completely buying it. He can see the boldness, but it's lacking a couple of the things he wants. He wants to see the product. He wants to see the famous Heinz bottle. They think that's part and parcel of what needs to go in there. Right, wrong, or indifferent, the client has the ultimate authority here. It seems like this pitch goes well, but it's not a home run.
I think Don, Stan, and Pete are feeling pretty great about their ketchup presentation on their way out. But then they see Ted, Peggy, and their art guy waiting to go in. They thought it was just SCDP presenting to Heinz. Don actually listens at the door to hear Peggy's pitch, which is confident and draws directly from Don's mentorship right down to the change the conversation line. And there's also a truth call out in her pitch. Don recognizes Peggy's campaign is good, but he has no room for pride about it. Do you think he's angry with her for competing with him, or just frustrated that he isn't the only guy in the game?
I think he feels betrayed. I think he feels that he has some ownership or responsibility for the creative that Peggy turned into. And I think he simultaneously recognizes her own talents and the rest, but I think he feels, he helped mentor and guide her and coach her to this place now where she is so strong and capable that she's an actual threat to his own campaign. And I think he's smart enough to realize that in the moment. So I think he's feeling all those feelings simultaneously. And it's not a great feeling to have in his mouth. And I think it's probably one of the deeper betrayals of this episode, at least from Don Draper's perspective, which just makes it perfect that even there, he's committing a betrayal, right? He's listening through the door to the presentation, which he shouldn't be hearing.
Joan is late to the office that morning, and she sees Harry and Scarlett walking past her. But she's dressed nicely. She doesn't avoid them. She greets them, "Good morning," and Harry corrects her, "Good afternoon." But Joan puts in her time at the office. Nobody can deny that. So a morning spent with her best friend before she leaves is not a crime. She doesn't need permission from Harry to do that.
And I think it also shows Harry's ongoing commitment to this friction with Joan. In a fight between Joan and Harry, yeah, I'm going to wager on Joan.
So Dawn comes into Joan's office with an apology about not being straight with her in the Scarlett situation. Joan is very cool to Dawn, and I don't really like that about her. Be cold to Harry and Scarlett if you have to, but, this is Joan with Kate's voice in her ears saying, "You're impressive. Don't worry about what they think." So Joan is relinquishing the minutia of secretary time cards and promoting Dawn to do that, and she seems very competent and a trustworthy source. But it's the Don Draper School of Promotion. It isn't given with a smile or encouragement. When she says, "You don't understand, this is a punishment," I feel like that's all directed at herself and not Dawn, as in, managing time cards is a thankless job and I've done it for too long. But Dawn is surprisingly okay with it, even though Joan is so unapproachable here, and she's really respectful. She says, "I don't care if everyone else hates me as long as you don't." And all Joan says is, "We'll see." I mean, I know she's allowed to be a human with bad moments, but she's really taking this out on the wrong person here.
Dawn's professionalism and dedication is carrying through, and I think she makes the right assessment. You don't want to make an enemy of Joan, and it's Dawn who initiates this contact. Simultaneously, I think we've got Joan realizing that if you want to be seen as something greater, and that means shedding yourself of some of these menial tasks or lesser roles that probably suck up a lot of time, energy, and attention, but nobody among the partners would care or give any weight to it or importance, even though it is actually quite essential for a smoothly running office. So by delegating this, it's going to free up Joan to put in more time and attention to things that matter more and probably serve her vision of where she wants to get to. So Joan is very cold here, and it's not my favorite look for her. But we know the scar tissue she's accumulated over the course of the episode.
In a nearby bar, Pete is trying to pump up the team that Heinz could still go their way until Ted's crew walks in and says they bought the idea from J. Walter Thompson in the room. Ted seems more open to commiserating about being a small agency going up against the big monster firms, but Don's team won't engage. And then Ken storms in. He just found out they went to catch up after all. Beans found out about it, and now Raymond's leaving the firm. Of course, Ken feels betrayed that they went behind his back, and this is all playing out in front of Ted, so it's another ugly secret out in the open.
It's such a train wreck of a scene. And I just love, Pete Campbell trying to put on the brave face of, oh, who's to say we've even lost, da, 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 da. And just the way Ted says it, they bought it in the room. It's just like, oh, it's the hope that kills you. And whatever hope they were clinging to. And Don knows this is true because he's listened at the door. And I think Don knows Peggy's campaign is better. It's just ripped out of their hands, even as Pete grumbles about it in the sort of unsportsmanlike, poor loser way we'd expect Pete Campbell to do so. Having betrayed everything to get to this place and then not getting selected by the client, it in many ways feels like a betrayal. It isn't really. I mean, the client never said it was, unique or they were the only ones, but you desperately want to win this and it's been all for naught and you've burned down what you already had.
Ted orders a drink called an Old Spanish, which is kind of a fun mirror to Don, who always orders old fashions. But it's also a fictional drink from the show 30 Rock, and Matt Weiner has confirmed that that's a hat tip to that show and the writing team. On his way out, Stan calls out Peggy for giving away the Heinz ketchup thing, and he never explicitly told her they were going after it. He just said Raymond was threatening them not to meet with Tim again. And when he says, "Oh, I think I see a friend," and he walks straight past her and flips her the bird, Peggy's pretty calm about it. She expects this reaction. But she burned her bridge with Ken, and now it feels like she's done the same with Stan, too.
Yeah, and I think I sympathize with Stan's perspective. I think Peggy is big enough to recognize that is a betrayal, like they were talking as friends, and I think Peggy is being an adult here and taking her lumps in the moment.
We see Megan on set. She does her love scene, and you can tell she feels good about how it went. When Arlene calls, "Your agent is here," Megan turns with a smile, but her face falls when she sees it's actually Dawn. And in her dressing room, Megan is really honest about her irritation with him. He's never come to set, he's never watched the show, and now he's here for this. And I don't know exactly why he would show up other than to make sure she's not happy about it. Maybe Dawn has residual anger from Peggy going off and doing her own thing and competing with Heinz, and now Megan's career keeps her from waiting at home for him. But Don really goes out of his way to be cruel. He compares her to a prostitute, kissing people for money. And, again, the hypocrisy of Don is masterful.
We know he feels guilt about his affair he's having, although he's certainly not going to stop. I just think he knows exactly how this is going to play out, and he's choosing to go there in order to be cruel. He knows that it's going to wind him up. It just seems like a very destructive, toxic behavior. We know how hyped Megan has been to get to this place where her role is increasing and her acting career is starting to have some success. So to stomp on it in this way that's very contrived and calculated, it makes me think that this was Don's intention all along by showing up.
Don goes directly from lecturing his wife and making her feel terrible to picking up a penny to hand to his neighbor mistress. Kiss people and money much, Don? Just what?
Maybe his mood is improving. I don't know.
And then Don tries to exert dominance over Sylvia and make her take off her cross pendant. And he's mocking her religion a bit. He basically, if it's important to a woman and it's not him, I guess it should be a put down. But Sylvia won't take it off. She's not ashamed of her religion. She tells Don she prays for him to find peace. And he's so far away from peace, it's the most ludicrous fantasy to him. He slides the cross pendant around to the back, so he's not looking at it while he cheats on his wife, who's probably still crying in her dressing room.
And I think it's kind of the perfect answer from Sylvia because he wants her to defend her religion. I don't get the sense Dawn is at all religious or has any respect for religious faith. But in this moment, she's not engaging in that. And the way she turns it, she prays for him and makes this expression of goodwill and concern for his well-being. When he closes his eyes and sort of tilts his head in, that was almost the perfect response because it takes any aggression or hostility that he wants an excuse to wield against her and rips it out of his hands. And he's just left with this someone who wishes him well. Does he feel some shame when he realizes how toxic and ugly he's been to his wife who loves him? And then even here trying to provoke his mistress about her faith. Does he feel some shame and disgust at himself and just how negative he's become?
He should. If he doesn't, he should. And it's so egotistical because she says, I pray for you. And he goes, for me to come back? He's like, no. I pray for your broken, messed up soul that is damaged beyond repair. And I hope that you will find peace. And that's a call out of bringing something into the light in their darkened room. He doesn't want to look at that. He doesn't want to look at all the ways that he doesn't have peace. And there are so many.
Some people don't have peace, and we can see all these blockers and reasons why they can't have peace. And, I think it makes us feel sympathy for them. But I just feel he's equipped with so many potential ways to get around it and to overcome those blockers. And if he's willing to lean into it, make the effort, and the fact that he doesn't, I find myself less sympathetic, unlike some others who feel a victim of circumstance or their own limitations. Don Draper has all the tools. He's got all the pieces. If he could just put things together, he could get to that place. And yet somehow Don Draper can't or won't get there.
It's hard to see him standing in his own way time after time. Our listener shout out today goes to Dorothea H. Thank you so much for leaving us positive feedback about our recent episode. We're so thankful to all of our listeners for all your support.
That's it for this episode of All Things Mad Men, from Chip and Dip to Zooby Zoo. Visit our website, madmenctoz.com, to vote for your favorite sterling lines and to share your opinions on our double dip questions for each episode.
You can find us on Instagram and YouTube at madmenctoz, and please listen, like, and subscribe. That's what the podcast's for.
Thanks for listening, everybody.